Hi, everyone. Welcome to Museum on Tap Happy Hour, presented by the Cincinnati Museum Center. I'm your host, Jessica Urban, and today I'm having a drink with Alan White, Assistant Professor of Health Sciences at the Christ College of Nursing and Health Sciences and the University of Cincinnati Office for Educational Innovation and Community Partnerships, and one of the architects of Edible City, the Art Atlas. Hi, Alan. Cheers.
Cheers. Hello, Jessica. Good to see you all.
You too. So I know you've got a great story for us today. And to kick it off, why don't you share with our friends watching at home a little bit more about the Edible City project?
Sure. So the Edible City is a project where we are showcasing Cincinnati's food shed, past, present, and future. The project has several deliverables. One is a coffee table book, probably the most beautiful coffee table book you've ever seen, that highlights some of the amazing innovations and food-related kind of discoveries, if you will, that have come from our region. We're also doing regional art exhibitions once the world reopens, as well as a food policy pamphlet in a series of events that engage the community members in their neighborhoods.
That's awesome. How did all this get started?
That's a good question. A couple years ago, I worked with a series of stakeholders around that are part of the food system here, and we came up with a timeline, actually a history that goes all the way back to about 1795 and traces some of these innovations. I didn't know it at the time, but that actually ended up being the draft for the book. A friend of mine, the co-leader on the project, Michaela Oldfield from the Greater Regional Cincinnati Food Policy Council, said, "Hey, Alan, this is great, but you know what's better than a bunch of text? A bunch of pictures." So we are in the process of creating this amazing coffee table book and art installation.
I bet that's going to be beautiful. What first got you interested in Cincinnati's food shed and agricultural history?
I started doing maps, so it's kind of interesting. I'm not a historian by training. I've been working in the local food scene for probably a decade now, with a lot of the players in the city and in the region, from the Office of Environment and Sustainability through our city government, the Civic Garden Center, Turner Farm, Gorman Heritage Farm. The Food Policy Council officially started about 5 years ago. I joined and worked with them. Produce Perks Midwest, and the timeline traced kind of the evolution. We tracked people, we tracked money, we tracked land. I did a dissertation tracking, looking at community-supported agriculture and all of the players that are involved in that. And so this kind of all funneled in to provide the basic framework for this project. And today we're actually going to focus on the future, looking specifically at permaculture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what permaculture is, and hopefully our viewers will see a nice little diagram float across the screen that talks about, it's called the permaculture flower. It kind of gives you a snapshot into what this thing is. Permaculture, in short, stands for permanent agriculture, and it's a design systems way of approaching the world. A lot of people use it for food, but it's not just about food. It's about energy. It's about humans' relationship with the planet in all formats. So it's really kind of this, it's a hopeful movement, which is why it's important to talk about now, given everything that people are dealing with.
Yeah, I understand. So if we wanted to talk about permaculture, for those like me who maybe aren't as familiar with what that means, where do we start with permaculture? What's history?
Yeah.
Who's involved?
Yeah, great question. So in our region, permaculture itself is about 40 years old. The idea was put forth back in the 80s. In our region specifically, we have a series of people who are kind of the big players. They have been trained and brought permaculture here. The first one I want to talk about is Andy Shawy. Andy's been doing permaculture work as far back as the late 1990s. which is crazy. He received, within permaculture, they have a thing called a permaculture design certificate, or a PDC. And this is just the training that you do and a little certificate that you get. I shouldn't say little, it's a big certificate that you get that allows you to go forth and begin doing the work yourself. And then they also have a teacher's training. So as you do a series of these trainings, you become certified yourself to teach others. So it's really great in that regard. It's accessible to anybody. This is not something that lives in the university. However, they are making inroads into the university. Andy, he lives over in Milan, Indiana. And back in 2006, he was one of the first ones to begin bringing the things that he was growing from a permaculture point of view to the Northside Farmers Market. He also started a farm called Wake the Farm Up. Back in 2012. And all the way back in 2001, he had started a plant walker series, which became formalized in 2014. And so he didn't do it this year, it got canceled due to the COVID, but this would have been his 6th year of taking people on native plant walks. So he did the Eco Village, the Enright Ridge Eco Village. He's done Treasure Lake. He's done Wooden Shoe Hollow. And he's really, opening this up to make it accessible to people. A couple fun numbers from Andy. Andy says he's taught about 8,000 students, and he's had anywhere from 600 to 700 classes, which could include one-off workshops or the full permaculture courses over the past 20 years. Andy was friends with Braden Trouth, who is one of the main players. There's a couple main players, but what Braden did was, after he received his training, is he started a design consultancy in 2010. And then in 2011, he partnered with Dale Murray, and they opened up thisland.org, which was, it had a mission of creating educational opportunities in permaculture, green building, and sustainable living in Cincinnati. It served as a parent organization and basically the hub of a network. One of the biggest things they did was they started an edible plant nursery. So anytime people say, hey, Alan, where should I go get some plants? I typically suggest that they go talk to Braden. He's got a couple sites, one down in Treasure Lake, which we'll be talking about in a minute, and then another one over near the Enright Ridge Eco Village. I think from my point of view, the work that Braden has done, he has a nonprofit, he has an advisory board. It's kind of one of the main hubs. Braden is, as one of the leaders of the Permaculture Guild, which is underneath the Cincinnati Permaculture Institute. Braden has, within his purview, he's worked with about 21 different certified teachers. So it's not like you take a class just from Braden. Braden sets it up so you learn from 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different people as you travel to their own sites, for example, during these courses, which is kind of cool. I asked for his numbers, he has 172 graduates.
Wow.
Which is pretty impressive, including 4 from Haiti. And also, since 2015, Braden has been successful at working for the University of Cincinnati, teaching courses in the horticulture department. And so he's been able to actually get permaculture into the university system, which is pretty unique. Next person I want to talk about is Doug Crouch. Doug and Andy Shawy, the first gentleman I mentioned, have a very similar path. They trained with a lot of the same people across the world, both here in the US and internationally. What really struck me as I spoke with Doug and I learned about what he has done is he teaches in Malaysia, Singapore, India, Portugal. He's traveled to Argentina. He's traveled to the Dominican Republic. He regularly teaches again in Spain, Bulgaria, Italy, Slovakia, and he's been doing this for about 15 years. So Braden may represent kind of like the main hub in terms of the organization that he's created, but Doug is an internationally renowned teacher who lives in Petersburg, which is just across the river over on 275 in Kentucky. And Doug has a little spot with his family called Treasure Lake, which is, in addition to what Braden has done with the Permaculture Guild, it's a hub. It's a little, come and see it. He's housed Andy's plant walks. He holds a pollinator. They've held a pollinator gathering. Doug also teaches sometimes at Maharishi University of Management, which is in Fairfield, Iowa. The permaculture design has actually been built into their curriculum there, which is pretty neat. Some of Doug's numbers, Doug says that he has taught about 1,500 to 2,000 students in his life. And that's also counting in our region the work that he has done at UC. Braden brought Doug in to teach in the University of Cincinnati in 2019. And, you know, one of the cool things that I got to do is when I asked these guys about all their numbers and I said, well, what's your vision for the future? Doug sees Treasure Lake as well as some of these other build a bioregional education center. So he's talking about microenterprise, essentially permaculture as a field station for what typically the extension stations are for our normal land-grant universities. So it's pretty unique.
Yeah, talk about innovation. That's something totally different, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. Another person I want to talk about, her name is Amy Strauss. She completed her permaculture design certificate in 2009 through the Cincinnati Permaculture Guild. In 2012, Amy started a blog called The 10th Acre Farm, and this was all focused on how do we look at our yard? So she is coming at this from a suburban perspective because a lot of people in the U.S. live in the suburbs. And what do we have a lot of in the suburbs?
A lot of lawns, a lot of
lawns, a lot of grass. And so this is a food, not lawns approach. And in 2017, Amy self-published a book called the Suburban Microfarm. And the book was so popular that it got picked up by Chelsea Green Publishing and was reprinted in 2018 in full color. She sold about 10,000 copies.
Wow.
Which is incredible. So she's taken this information that she has learned through our local permaculture network and now made it available for the masses, in addition to having her regular blog that she still does. She says about 13,000 people receive her newsletters through the blog. She has over 200 articles posted, and she says that she has 150 to 200,000 hits on her blog a month.
Wow. That's encouraging that so many people are interested.
Yes, it really is. And so she is helping to show us what we can do with our lawns in the suburbs. The fifth person I want to talk about, his name is Chris Smith. Chris received his PDC in 2010, also with Braden and Andy. Chris, for about 6 years from 2012 to 2018, worked for Price Hill Will, which is a nonprofit organization in Price Hill, and he was their sustainability coordinator. In 2017, Chris started to do a series of what he calls public orchards. He calls this the Common Orchard Project, and he did one on Schiff Avenue, which is off of Glenway. I talked to Chris. I said, you know, what's your vision? And he really wants to see in the next 10 years, he wants to add 10 public orchards to Cincinnati each year. So in a decade, he wants to be at 100. I think he has about, call it 10 now that he's been working on for the past 2 to 3 years. Chris also wants to have his Common Orchard project in every major Midwest city. So some really beautiful goals for kind of not just sharing this knowledge, but showing, like demonstrating it to the public and also making it available to the public. Chris has taught about 8 permaculture design courses. He says he's had about 120 students and he's done over 20 workshops, probably impacting about 1,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah. The last person I want to talk about is Susan Vonderhaar. Susan received her permaculture design certificate in 2011, also through the permaculture group that Braden runs. In 2015, she was hired by Xavier University to teach an agroecology course. In 2016, she joined the board of the Cincinnati Permaculture Institute. In 2018, she's been teaching at Chatfield University, where she's able to weave permaculture into biology as well as ecology and environmental science. One of the reasons I bring Susan up is she's been involved with Dater Montessori's Nature Center for about 20 years. And so she's been able to take these concepts and put them to work in practice at a Cincinnati public school and make these kinds of things available for the students and their parents.
That's awesome. Helping out the next generation.
Yep. So this is, for anyone interested in permaculture, you are really lucky to live in a region that has so many awesome people doing so many different things with this approach to the human-animal earth relationship.
Yeah, the art atlas sounds amazing. That it combines, part educational tool, part, work of advocacy. All those people that we just heard about are doing such incredible things. But it also sounds kind of like a big love letter to Cincinnati's like agricultural history and kind of the natural world that surrounds us here. What are you hoping that people take away from the Edible City Project?
Wow, Jessica, that's a really good question. I think for me, there's some. I'm just amazed at the history as I've come to learn it myself. I think people should understand that for a city of our size, given where we're at in terms of development in the United States, right? We're in the Midwest, but we're not quite in the West. We have so much that happened here that has influenced the world food system. So you can start with what the native lands looked like, where the tribes lived, what the soils were like, what were the things that they tended from the forest, and a lot of first peoples practiced agriculture. But then you fast forward and you understand, oh my gosh, Johnny Appleseed came through. Just north of here, right? He was ahead of the settlers. He was creating these orchards, and then he would come back and he would sell it to them. And of course, they would make apple cider, actually hard cider, and then an even harder drink called Applejack out of it. You learn about Procter & Gamble, which came about because they were using an excess of the waste that was coming from our meat packing and slaughtering operations, which, by the way, Cincinnati invented the disassembly line for animals. So one of the stories here is that Henry Ford visited Cincinnati to look at the disassembly line to understand how he might actually be able to put cars together using that same operation on the other end. P&G is now a huge corporation, right? The largest consumer products corporation in the world. You have Barney Kroger, who started Kroger in 1896. You have Castellini. Just to learn, the takeaway from the history portion for me is, for a city of our size, it's really amazing what has come out of here. The last thing I want to mention is that Lorenzo Langstroth, who did a lot of work with bees and the removable bee frame, he did his work out in Pennsylvania, but he came here, and that's where he kind of perfected it. He got a patent for it. And now if you think about what the modern bee industry looks like in terms of 30% of our crops need to be pollinated, $16 billion, I think, is what that industry is estimated at, where people now truck their hives from one almond orchard to one apricot orchard, all over the country to provide that really important ecosystem service. That came from Oxford, Ohio.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Alan, that was a great story. I know I learned a lot. I hope our friends watching at home did as well. If people have questions about the Edible City Project, where can they find them out? Where can they reach you?
Yeah, Edible City is it's being hosted by the Green Umbrella, so we're in partnership with Green Umbrella. So I would just go to their website and do a search for Edible City, and we have our own page that pops up that talks a little bit more about the project in depth.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Alan, so much for having a drink with me today. Thank you to everyone watching at home, and we will see you next time for Museum on Tap Happy Hour. Cheers.
Cheers.